Welcome back to our video presentations regarding how the internal medicine program at the University of Washington has been working to connect EPA-based rotation-specific evaluations to ACGME milestone reporting. In this video, we will be showing our process of mapping what we call milestone elements to these EPA-based evaluations. As a reminder, for these videos, we are calling the 22 different developmental streams that will be reported to the ACGME internal medicine group subcompetencies. This example shows the first subcompetency, Patient Care 1, which is the ability to gather and synthesize essential and accurate information to define each patient's problems. We will be reporting progress along the milestones for each of these subcompetencies. For our presentations, we're calling these short descriptive phrases, which are in the milestone columns for each subcompetency, milestone elements. Here, we have circled some of these milestone elements. In our earlier videos, we showed that the first step of this process, which was to identify rotation-specific entrustable activities, or EPAs, and that these rotation-specific EPAs should match both the evaluation questions related to that rotation, as well as the learning objectives for the resident on that rotation. For rotation directors and key rotation faculty, this involved asking them to identify what are the things that a resident should be able to do after completing this educational experience. For the resident, the important part of this is the identification of learning objectives. For the faculty member, the important part is for what activities are they gauging trustworthiness. Here, this is an example of what part of the evaluation form looks like for the general medicine wards in our university hospital. The evaluation asks the faculty member to assess for each of these specific activities how much trust they have in a resident's ability to perform the activities. The trust questions here are pegged to the degree of supervision required. Step 2 in this process is to identify which of the 22 ACGME internal medicine subcompetencies are involved with successful completion of each of these rotation activities. With Step 1, we have created rotation-specific evaluation questions and learning objectives that match one another. With Step 2, we have identified some of the 22 subcompetencies that are involved with each of these activities and which will be reported to ACGME semi-annually. The question that we will address for the remainder of this video will be how to bridge the EPA-based evaluation questions to the reporting progress along the 22 ACGME subcompetencies. The way we at the University of Washington's Internal Medicine Residency Program have worked to bridge the EPA-based evaluations to the ACGME subcompetencies is by mapping to the milestone elements for each subcompetency. For each of the rotation EPAs, we map the milestone elements that are connected to each degree of entrustment or supervision for each subcompetency. What does this actually look like? How do we bridge these through the milestone elements? Let's go back to the evaluation form that I previously showed. We'll focus for the next slides on the second evaluation item, which asks how much trust and supervision is required for the resident to coordinate discharge for a patient in a way that will reduce their chances of readmission. When we considered this EPA, we felt that for a good and safe discharge, there were important things a resident would have to do in systems-based practice, in interpersonal and communication skills, and in professionalism. When we went through the 22 ACGME subcompetencies, we found these 3 systems-based practice subcompetencies were connected to this activity, this communication subcompetency, and this professionalism subcompetency. Let's focus on this first systems-based practice subcompetency, SBP1, or the ability to work effectively within an interprofessional team. Our evaluation form asks the faculty member to gauge how much trust he or she has in a resident to safely coordinate discharge. And the possible answers include with full supervision, partial supervision, minimal supervision, ready to do independently if they're graduated today, and aspirational. For this subcompetency of working effectively within an interprofessional team, we asked, what would it take to go from needing to supervise the resident in person at the bedside to partial supervision, which is nearby but not necessarily physically present? we went back to the original subcompetency SBP1 that was published and looked at the milestone elements that describe each stage of that subcompetency. We felt that in order to feel that a resident could be trusted to discharge with partial rather than complete supervision, we would want them to understand the roles and responsibilities of team members and to participate in team discussions, as circled here. We mapped these milestone elements in our grid here and placed them in the column under partial supervision. We then asked, what would it take to feel ready to trust a resident to do a safe discharge with minimal supervision? That is, to need a supervising physician available by telephone rather than physically nearby. Again, we go back to the published subcompetency SBP1, and again we are looking for those milestone elements that a resident would need to demonstrate for an attending to feel comfortable allowing that resident to discharge a patient without a supervising physician physically nearby. Here are the milestone elements we identified. And here are those same milestone elements placed into our grid here under the column of minimal supervision. We then asked, what would it take to trust a resident to safely discharge a patient completely independently if he or she were to graduate from the program today? What would represent an ideal safe discharge for a patient? And here are the milestone elements we identified. And here they are again, this time placed under the column of aspirational. Notice that in the original published subcompetency, SBP1, there are a group of milestone elements that have been categorized as describing a resident who is ready for unsupervised practice. In our grid, this would correspond to ready to do independently. However, note that we place the same milestone elements at a developmentally earlier stage under the category of with minimal supervision. At the University of Washington, our program philosophies and values would be to expect these actions to be demonstrated not when a resident is ready for independent practice. Rather, we expect our residents to demonstrate these much earlier, and so have created mapping of these milestone elements that match our program philosophy. Also note, we haven't mapped this EPA to all the milestone elements in this subcompetency. We only map to those that make sense to this EPA. So to show our grid again, this is how the EPA of safe discharge in a way that reduces the chance of readmission maps to the subcompetency SBP1. And this is how it maps to SBP3, and then maps to SBP4, and then maps to interpersonal and communication skills subcompetency 3. While this can seem like an enormous amount of work, once familiar with the process, our experience has been that the entire mapping process can be done in less than an hour per individual EPA. So step 3 of our process that we've described here has connected evaluation questions based upon rotation-specific EPAs to the 22 subcompetencies reported to ACGME via these milestone elements, and can be used by our Clinical Competence Committee to determine progress along these subcompetencies. Together with our first 2 steps, we have now created a system that connects rotation learning objectives for residents to evaluations assessing degree of trust and supervision to subcompetencies that are reported to the ACGME. How this actually would work, starting from the evaluation form all the way to reporting to the ACGME, will be reported in our next video.